Hi, everybody. It's Steve Dixon here with Keller Williams Edge Realty, and I'm here today with our second episode of Sit Down with Steve. And we've got a great guest today, Dennis McEniry from McEniry and McEniry Law Firm here in South Burlington. And we're excited to have him today to talk about a few topics that I think are relevant to real estate law, and a little bit about family law. So we'll just chat a bit about that. And Dennis, I'll pass it over to you, and maybe you can tell us about yourself and your practice.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Steve. Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, my brother and I work here in Burlington. We've got a two-person family firm. My practice is, I guess you would describe it as a general practice. I do a lot of real estate, sales, purchases, refinances. I do wills and powers of attorney and estate planning for my clients. And I do estate administration as well, probate and dealing with estate sales, that sort of thing. I do have a background in family law. I don't get into the trenches and go into family courts. I've done that for years and I've gotten out of it. But I do have enough of a background, and particularly it dovetails quite well with the real estate practice and the estate practice. I mean, in real estate, we're doing cohabitation agreements, or we're often doing refinances and transfers pursuant to a separation agreement. And then we're seeing a lot of blended family types of situations. So if we're doing estate plannings where people have children from first relationship, we need to take that into account. And having a background in family law is helpful. So they all sort of mesh together. We know enough of what we don't know and are pretty well networked with other firms. So we deal with a commercial corporate firm here in Burlington. I do a lot of referral work with a family law specialized boutique. And right now, which is really relevant, is we have an employment law firm in Hamilton that we're networked with. So I'm getting a lot of calls based on this pandemic on layoffs and termination notices and packages and that sort of thing. So we work well with a few other firms in the area for areas that we don't do ourselves. So that would be a sort of a general idea of what I do.
It's a broad scope. Appreciate that. That's great. Okay. Yeah. Employment laws, we continue to see some stats relevant to that picking up, and a lot of employer and employee relations and kind of how that comes to fruition here in the world we're in. Yep. So I'll dive right into some questions here, Dennis, just, kind of talking a little bit about COVID-19 and some of the changes that you've made to your law practice. We're just curious, what are some of those changes, and how are we adapting, I should say, to the current world that we're in right now?
Yeah, so from the law practice standpoint, we have made a number of changes. I think this caught everybody sort of off guard, so we had to make some pretty quick changes quickly. And fortunately, the Law Society and the law associations have been really bang on with assisting. They've been running free seminars on how we can adjust to those changes. They've petitioned government agencies to make remote signings and execution of documents a lot more fluid, so as to avoid any face-to-face contact. In terms of our practice, it's actually offered an opportunity to become a lot more automated. We've now transitioned to banking almost completely online. We do deposits right here in the office. We've got a machine that allows us to deposit big sums of money into our trust account directly. We do bank wires to lawyers now for closings. We receive wires that way. E-transfers have always been there. We now associated also with FCT, which is a program called Easy Fund, which allows for mortgages and debts to be paid off. So if we're doing a refinance, we are able to receive the funds remotely, do our banking, and do bank wires to pay off mortgages or car loans or lines of credit, etc. The other thing is that the registry office, they've told us through one of the seminars that they under no circumstances do they intend to shut down. So they do a lot of work from an automated standpoint. Some of the branches of the real estate registry offices are open on a sort of a piecemeal basis, but all the registrations primarily in Ontario happen by way of an automated registration system. So searching titles and doing registrations, it's still right at our desktop to do it. So from that standpoint, everything is pretty automated. In terms of meeting with the clients, again, we are able to have documents signed remotely. So typically I would send them a package of documents, they can print them out, and then we entertain a Zoom or a FaceTime call, and I watch them sign it. We get those documents back. Um, and then I'm able to notarize or swear their signatures that way. Now, we've got the blessing of the Law Society on doing that, but it's to be honest, it's almost on a piecemeal basis. So if a lawyer takes exception to it, if a bank takes exception to signing remotely, then we have to perhaps indulge an in-office signing. Hasn't happened too often. I think we're seeing a real collegial approach to things right now, and we'll get into that in a minute. But for the most part, I'm doing a lot of signings remotely. The odd time we have a sign up in person. We do have a separate boardroom with a separate entrance, which we keep sort of sterilized and wash it down after every client comes in. And we're talking maybe 1 or 2 clients a week right now. So our offices, they're open for business. But I mean, we keep the doors shut, and we discourage any real traffic, and sort of observe the social distancing from that perspective.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like you put a lot of practices into place with regards to adjusting to the current times we're in, which is really good
Yeah,
news.
and it's actually the silver lining is that I think that going forward, it's going to offer a lot of opportunities for automation. It sort of almost forces us into a situation where we're able to negotiate and close transactions right behind our desk. And similar with the wills. Now, the Law Society has also come out and given us an opportunity to have wills signed remotely. And certainly with I've got a fairly senior clientele who are deathly afraid of coming out of their house and into an office. So there is a method in place that allows that to happen.
Okay, that's great.
Mhm.
Fabulous. I know you and I have talked back and forth about some of the COVID-19 clauses that we're seeing coming into real estate contracts. Some buyers and sellers negotiating or looking for extensions from closing in the event that land registry office is closed. Some people even, asking for 30, 60, or 90 days, that if things are closed and no one can close it, the deal's null and void. I know I've seen some of that in contracts that I've been working on in the last few weeks here. What are some of the changes, Dennis, that you're seeing day to day with respect to real estate transactions in general?
Yeah, well, certainly those clauses are coming into play, and depending on what your perspective is, if you're acting for a buyer or a seller, and you know as well as I do, they have different objectives, and the question is, for the most part, I'm seeing clients wanting to close these deals. I am seeing some creative clauses coming in. I'm seeing some indulgences and some extensions, but for the most part, whether they're deals that were sort of preconceived before this pandemic hit, or since then, for the most part, they're getting closed. The registry office is open. The banks are able to do the financing. And you've probably seen better than I on how they're stick handling through things such as home inspections or appraisals, but they're getting done. I mean, I'm not seeing any aborted deals right now. I'm seeing extended deals, and certainly it's all a question of your client's objective. And I've had a client not be able to conclude a home inspection in cottage country, and he wasn't really inclined to wanting to go ahead with this. It was a very peripheral type of deal that he didn't want. So rather than extend it indefinitely, he extended it for a period of 1 month, and he's going to see what happens within that 1 month period. I suppose from your perspective, it's a question of whether or not this thing gets extended into infinity, or whether there's a sort of a cutoff date, and it all depends on what your client's interests are in terms of that transaction. Yeah, so I'm seeing. I mean, as far as I can see, the banks are still funding it. their financing might be a bit slower than usual, so you have to really stay on top of it. I mean, a proactive approach and sort of anticipating that there might be some obstacles is in your best interest. We tell clients to get in to their banks nice and early, stay on top of the banks for appraisals. We try to get the paperwork signed as far in advance as possible. But for the most part, the deals are closing, and there's new deals coming along. It's not everybody was singing this doom and gloom that the market is going to come to a screeching halt, but I'm seeing new activity coming in, purchases, sales. We haven't talked about new builds, but even those are closing in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's an interim occupancy on a condominium situation or a final closing on a new build, it's the builders are still pushing ahead, as are their law firms.
That's great. So there seems to be a
Mhm.
lot of optimism out there. And I mean, I'll touch on it very lightly from my standpoint, but with regards to home inspections and appraisals and that sort of thing, I'm seeing some creative things like, more aggressive buyer and seller representation and warranties on chattels and fixtures working right up to closing. I'm seeing, I had a couple of appraisers reach out to me recently on a few of my listings, just asking for measurements, pictures of HVAC, pictures up and down the street. Normal legwork that an appraiser would do on a physical walkthrough, we had to provide that from the listing side to the buyer's lender's appraiser. So we're seeing some of that happening just to move things along, which is positive. I mean, I think there's a lot of optimism there, so that's great.
Yeah, I think in terms of what I'm hearing from clients is they're still doing their due diligence on looking at properties they want to buy. I mean, mortgage rates are good, and people are still qualifying for the mortgages, notwithstanding some layoffs. But their due diligence happens in advance. You have the virtual tours, you have a lot of the online marketing of the property, so that they try to minimize the amount of time they're actually in the property. But I mean, buying sight unseen is I'm not seeing too much of that happening right now.
No, neither am I. It kind of leads to the next question of, relevant to COVID-19. I know I've been getting a few buyers and sellers reaching out, perhaps under, nerves or just thoughts in general, whether a buyer or seller can walk away from a firm deal at closing. And I'm going to let you elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, it's funny that that topic did come up in one of our Law Society seminars a week or so ago, and whether or not frustration of the contract by virtue of what's going on out there is grounds to get out of the contract, and it is not. A contract is a contract, so it's binding. And like I say, what I'm finding is that I'm not seeing anyways any situations where people are trying to use that as a scapegoat to get out of the deal. A lot of reassurance has to go on with the clients. I'm getting a lot of cold calls from people saying, "Well, what's happening with my deal? Do I need to worry about buying because I can't really count on my sale closing?" We're doing a lot of hand holding right now, and a lot of sort of just sort of tweaking deals or speaking to counsel to make sure everybody's on side. And like I say, I think there's a fairly collegial approach to things right now. People are trying to get the deals closed or trying to make amends. Where people whereas you would see people playing their cards pretty close to the vest before, they're sort of opening up and saying, "Hey, this is some of the obstacles we're faced with. We have a client in the States that can't sign a mortgage because they can't get across the border to sign. What can
Right.
we do about that?" So people are sort of putting their cards on the table to get these deals done. I suppose, and I have seen situations where um, clients have tried to use this as an opportunity to either seek maybe an abatement in the purchase price or to extend the closing. And it all depends on the circumstances. I had somebody try to say, well, we couldn't get access to a senior's condominium building, so we can't close the deal. When in fact they could get possession. They didn't want to close simply because they wanted to do renovations to the property, and they couldn't get the renovators in there, but they certainly could get in and take title to the property. So you've got to be careful and really dig down deep and look at the circumstances of the transactions. But for the most part, this pandemic doesn't allow you sort of a free pass to get out of a transaction.
Okay, good to know. I think that's great advice. Let's touch quickly on, estate situations, powers of attorney. What's probate like in the courts right now, Dennis? And maybe a little bit about will preparation. How are you guiding your clients during the change of events that we're faced with today?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the clients that I deal with wills and powers of attorney on, I mean, procrastination just makes people normal. Everybody puts off these things, but perhaps because of the people passing away, or maybe it's because they have more time on their hands. I'm getting a lot of people kicking the tires again
Okay.
and moving towards completing their wills and powers of attorney. So the great thing about internet is that we can do FaceTime meetings like this with clients and understand their instructions. We do a lot of back and forth by emails with draft documents, and again, like I say, it's there's a possibility now that the people that aren't comfortable coming into the office to sign on those documents, and I'd say probably it's about a 50-50 split right now, because the process to sign wills and powers of attorney remotely, it's a bit more cumbersome than a typical in-face meeting. Basically, what we have to do is we have to get the documents to them. We have to go over the documents with them by way of a video conference. We have to actually see them sign it. And if there's two witnesses on there, say my assistant and I, we'd have to have the one meeting where we see them sign it. Then we have to have a subsequent meeting where they see us witness their signatures. So basically it's a bit more elaborate. I mean, we're still trying to maintain our price points and that, so there's no extra cost to the clients to get this done, especially if there's some urgency to the estate plans. I mean, I've had one client in a lockdown situation at a long-term care facility where she's needed to get a will done. And we were able to, she was tech savvy enough to be able to FaceTime us and got the documents prepared, got them signed. We were able to get them out of the facility and get them witnessed on our end. So it's definitely doable. But like I say, I'd say I'd say about 50% of the people still want to come in and have that face-to-face meeting. It's a little more expedient. And like I say, we have a boardroom here that we have a separate entrance to, that we keep our distance and manage to keep it as safe as possible. In terms of estate work, courts are still open. A lot of the estate work that we do is not necessarily an in-person meeting in front of a judge. So it's a lot of administrative work. So we're able to prepare that and get it up to the courts, and the judges see everything in chambers. Actually, to be honest, I think we're finding that the timing on getting it done now is as quick, if not quicker, than what it was before. I don't know if that's because there's maybe more an abundance of judges that are able to look at this. Maybe they're looking at the doom and gloom scenario, thinking there might be some more estate work that gets sort of hits the fan, so to speak, over the next little while. So maybe they're clearing up the dockets. But for the most part, we're able to get the estate applications in and get them processed pretty quickly through the courts. I had one come back yesterday from Toronto that I didn't think was going to come back for another month or so. So that was welcome news. And again, it's the estate planning is something that the people we sit down and we think tank it. Like I say, I do a little bit of family law. So the blended family type of situation on estate plans is becoming a lot more prevalent, taking into consideration children from one relationship, children from another relationship.
Right.
And if we have to involve the assistance of another lawyer to get independent legal advice on that, we can do that as well.
Right. Okay, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any advice you would give to people during a time of uncertainty in order for them to best prepare for any potential unknowns relevant to what you specialize in?
Well, it's Yeah, I think it's basically the same general advice that it's out there right now. Don't panic. Don't sell off all your stocks. Proceed cautiously and as proactively as possible. And if you're looking to buy a house, continue to look to buy a house. If you're looking to sell a house, take the word of your experts, real estate agents, your mortgage planners, your financial specialists. Just proceed a bit more cautiously. I don't think you want to just bring everything to a halt right now, because I mean, calming their nerves and fielding uh, um, people with anxiety right now, it seems to be commonplace, and you probably see it as well as I do.
Yeah.
Again, the more proactive you can be. You can't sort of rest on your laurels and think that things are just going to close automatically. You've got to look at the what ifs and and deal with those curveballs that are thrown at you right now. But like I say, for the most part, people still want to do business. They still want to. What I am seeing, actually, and I've mentioned this, is I am seeing a lot of refinances. So people are being a bit more proactive, sort of managing their debt, consolidating their credit cards, and getting one payment, or getting a little bit of a slush fund in case they need money for a rainy day. Um, so that's driving a little bit of my real estate practice right now, which is it's probably good planning. The rates are good, and it doesn't hurt to have. I mean, if somebody's forecasting that they think they might be laid off or their spouse might be laid off, sometimes they want to be a bit more proactive and put that financing in place. And so that would be my advice to people: is just continue to do what you're doing, but just proceed cautiously and rely on the expert opinions of people around you.
Perfect. And if people have any questions, Dennis, how can they reach out to your office?
Yeah, I'm on. I've got a web page. I'm available at. They can email me at Dennis at McEniryLawyers.com, or phone calls. I mean, we're quite receptive to people just calling in. All my work, quite frankly, I don't do a whole lot of marketing. I do a lot of referral work from people such as yourself,
Okay.
a lot of repeat clients. So um, uh, that's typically how they get a hold of me. Either Google my name online, and if you just want to ask a question, just give me a call.
Okay, that's wonderful. All right, I think that pretty much wraps us up for today's episode of Sit Down with Steve. Dennis, thanks so much for joining us today. And anyone, if you have any questions, reach out to his office. Any real estate related questions, I can be reached at 905-466-1000 or buy or sell at stevedixon.ca. I will be doing these regular recordings via Facebook and Instagram. Our tag is at Steve Dixon Associates. We'll look forward to connecting with you guys soon, and everybody have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Steve.